Hi, I'm Liz Jackson.
Hi, I'm Alex Haagaard, and this is how intra-community stories become extra-community tropes.
What we are going to do during this session is we are going to tell a story, and through that story, what we want to do is we want to show you a progression, because in society, we're oftentimes taught that disability is concrete. It's something that can be fixed. We can do something regarding compliance, that it just is. And our experience of disability is one in where our thinking continually evolves and there is a continuous progression. And so if we are going to reach disabled consumers instead of use disabled people to inspire broader audiences, what Alex and I believe is you actually need to show how your thinking evolves. And so this is really what we're trying to do, is urge each of you to do this. So first, I'm going to share a chart with you. So this is a chart that we created of just how disability stories are told in the impact. I am going to just stick with the left-hand side for now. Alex will get into the rest of the chart later. But on the left, you will see on the top that it says medical model. So the medical model is a derivative of industrialization. It basically says that we are disabled by our bodies, right? It puts the pressure on our bodies. Below that is the social model. The social model was created in response to the medical model. And what it says is that it's barriers in society, it's stigmas that are disabling us. So whereas the medical model states we are disabled by our bodies, the social model states, yes, we are disabled, but not by our bodies. It's by the world around us. But the space in which Alex and I work is in the cultural model. And if you were to spend some time on, disability Twitter or on social media, what you would experience is an engagement in a much more complex experience of disability. And so this is really where we are really aimed at. So I'm going to shift over to something else real quick. The thing that I am sharing, screen share is so hard on Zoom. So the thing I'm sharing of my screen right now is, this is a website that Alex and I created a couple of years ago. It's called Critical Access. And if you look on the upper left-hand corner, you will see that the upper right-hand quadrant is filled in the logo. And the reason is because critical access is a matrix. At the top of the matrix, we have sort of disability themes that amplify, and on the right, what we have is disability themes that are emerging. And so that upper right-hand quadrant is really what we want brands to strive for. So we actually created Critical Access because we wanted to shift the way that ads were being created for, specifically at the time, the Paralympics. And so if you scroll down, what you'll see is a series of videos that we have reviewed and tagged according to disability studies theme or disability studies trope. So one of the ads that we reviewed on Critical Access, I'm just going to show you the last minute of it. I'm going to play right now.
No, you can't.
Yes, I can!
Are you ready? I can climb Everest. Yes, I can. I can fight here all night and never rest. Yes, I can. I was just born today. I can go all the way. Yes!
So this was considered one of the all-time greatest ads that's ever been done in and around the Paralympics. And the way that the ad was discussed, I'm going to pull the chart up again real quick. Sorry, I'm continuing to do this to you. So the way that the ad was discussed, we were told this is the embodiment of the social model. But if you were to watch the whole ad, what you realize is it doesn't actually really present societal barriers. And when you listen to the theme, right, the theme is yes, I can. And if you think about can and something you can and can't do, that's framed around ability. And so, right, it's the lyrics of the song are very much in the medical model, which is something we don't recommend. And so one of the questions we had asked ourselves was, what if they switched from yes, I can to yes, I am? And so this is a lot of the work that Alex and I do. So last year I was speaking at an event called Ad Color, and I wanted to show what would happen if you became highly aware of all the various tropes and you created an ad specifically to not fall into those tropes. And so I created a Nike ad, and the Nike ad was, this is how the Nike ad played out. So there is a black man, black woman, wheelchair user, and they are sitting in front of the camera. And they say, I have never stood up for what I believe in, and I have never marched in protest, right? But I'm in good company, because in the 1960s, while disabled people were fighting for basic access rights, right, Rosa Parks took a seat. And these days, while disabled people are fighting for basic healthcare rights, basic rights, right, Colin Kaepernick took a knee. And what the ad does is it shows the things that we do from a seated position that are so powerful. And so the hashtag for this ad was the power of a seat. And so I presented it at this conference, and afterward, right, this is the progression of a story. Afterward, somebody from Nike happened to be there, and he approached me, and we were drinking, and we were also talking, and he was saying to me that he found what I had to say really interesting, but that the thing that they're really focused on at Nike now, and I didn't sign anything, the thing they're focused on at Nike right now is that there is this generation of, right now, girls that aren't interested in sports in the way that they've traditionally been practiced. So an organized sport where you have rules, right? Baseball, football, et cetera, et cetera. And so, Nike has really been working hard trying to figure out how to capture these girls. And I said to him is, well, you shouldn't be trying to. What you need to do is you need to figure out if these girls are rejecting the way that it's been done. You need to figure out who else historically has done that. And historically, it's actually been Black disabled people, right? And if you think about it, right, people in the Paralympics are predominantly white because just the amount of money, the amount, like the amount of privilege you need to have access to these sports. And so where you see a lot of Black disabled people is in dance, right? And using their bodies in atypical ways and really organizing in the ways that they want to. And so if you want to reach people, what you need to do is start trying to amplify those people that have made efforts to move their bodies in atypical ways. And so I think he seemed fairly interested, but Alex and I got really stuck on this idea. So I'm going to throw to Alex to elaborate. You're muted.
Good, I was muted because I was swearing. So the first thing that I should probably preface this with is that in addition to identifying as disabled, I also identify as chronically ill, and there are some people who sort of might qualify as chronically ill, for whom that's a big part of identity, and some who identify more with the disability identity. But for me, they're both sort of equally significant parts of my identity, and they shape the way I experience my body and the world around me. So in the chronic illness communities that I'm a part of, there's this kind of running joke that just going about our day-to-day business is an extreme sport. And so to give you an example, a few weeks ago, I finally bought myself a new winter coat on sale, because it turns out this is literally the best time of year to buy winter clothing. But I have always absolutely hated winter clothes. When they're warm enough to block out the wind chill here in Canada, they're so heavy that they make my joints ache and exhaust me to the point that I need to take a nap when I come inside. They're so impermeable that I start to overheat as soon as I go inside a building or get on public transit, which is kind of a problem when you tend to faint in the heat. I'm allergic to down feathers, and this past winter, the first time that I actually lived on my own without access to a car since I began using my wheelchair, I also realized that they keep me from moving my arms comfortably and tend to start splitting apart at the zipper at the bottom when I bend forward to self-propel, which is like literally all I'm doing when I'm self-propelling. All of which to say is winter gear has historically not had amazing associations for me. Until I realized about 3 weeks ago that what I needed was actually a ski jacket, because they're built for people who are active. They need something warm that's also light. It's good at regulating temperature, and it allows them to move their arms and torsos freely. I also decided to pick up a pair of OTG ski goggles after realizing they were the key to finally solving my problem of needing to keep my entire face protected from the cold while also needing to be able to see out of my glasses, which is usually pretty helpful. I'm actually finally excited for winter, like literally the first time in living memory, because you know, I'm going to be comfortable and able to move around, but I'm also really looking forward to being able to freak people out with my inappropriately intense gear while I just go out and like pick up coffee. But this really sort of struck me, and this is something Liz and I have been thinking about, but sort of when I picked up that jacket, this conversation that Liz and I have been having on an ongoing basis came back to me that it seems like if an athletic company like Nike is looking to engage with people who don't feel connected to traditional sports, there isn't any better opportunity for them than to celebrate the people who are already incorporating this kind of gear into their everyday lives. And most of us aren't participating in traditional sports. Like, we aren't even allowed in the Paralympics for the most part because we're not disabled enough. But we're out here buying sports tapes so we can carry groceries, and weightlifting gloves so we can pop wheelies and jump terrible curb cuts, and moisture wicking shirts with UPS so we don't get hives from the sun. And what if Nike sees this opportunity to popularize this already existing aesthetic of chronic illness that's grounded in these comfy as hell, rad as hell tech wear items? So I brought this up again with Liz a little while ago, and she had concerns though, and I think possibly having watched the Superhumans video, maybe those concerns are obvious. She asked, how would this be delineated from people who are inspired by us just for getting out of bed? And that's a really good question that we're going to put a pin in. So earlier this week, Liz and I were chatting with Kat in preparation for this video, and Liz brought up the film Crip Camp as a possible example of successful cultural representation of disability, because it's been really well received by disability advocates and activists. And if you're not familiar with it, it is a documentary from Netflix. It tells the story of a camp in the 70s for teens with disabilities. And many of those teens grew up to become really prominent advocates in the disability rights movement. And Kat loved the film and mentioned that she's been recommending it to her colleagues because it so skillfully portrays a history and culture that's not just underrepresented, but largely even unknown within this field. At the same time, I had concerns about the film. The history and culture that's traced by Crip Camp is often already positioned as sort of the sole history and culture of disability in the United States, even within many disabled-led spaces. And I'm coming back to my identification as chronically ill here, because as someone who's chronically ill and essentially medically invisible and has had my entire experience of my body and my disability defined by doubt rather than by being treated as a spectacle, I find that a lot of the histories that get told that are the kind that are represented in Crip Camp don't resonate with me very much, and it's troubling that my identity and life experiences are not being reflected by this thing that's being positioned as the history of disability. And so when I see non-disabled people talking about how wonderful Crip Camp is and recommending it to their friends, I also see disability culture being flattened even as it's becoming popularized. And I see histories and cultures of invisibly disabled people, intellectually and developmentally disabled people, and Black and Indigenous disabled people being erased from that flattened image. And Kat pointed out very rightly that no piece of media representation can ever fully represent a culture in all its multiplicity. And this is absolutely true, and it's also not the problem I was talking about. The problem is that when a piece of representation of a piece of a marginalized culture becomes tremendously popular with the people who do not belong to that culture, first of all, usually this representation involves people who are relatively privileged within their community and culture and relatively well connected outside of that community. The people who don't belong to the culture watch this piece of representation with a very different level of cultural knowledge and understanding. They're incredibly moved by it, and then they share it with their friends and their colleagues because it's so groundbreaking to them. They've never come across anything like this before. And because these outside admirers don't know anything else about the culture and don't necessarily even know how to find the missing pieces if they wanted to look for them, this fragment becomes the mainstream image of that culture writ large. And eventually, someone working in a position of power in a creative field will decide to create some more representation of this culture. And because, let's face it, statistically, this person in power is probably not a part of that marginalized culture, their knowledge of the culture has probably also been deeply influenced by this one fragmentary image. And so the image gets reworked, reframed, and repackaged for the broad gaze of the mainstream, and it happens over and over like a meme. And this is how an intercommunity story becomes a trope. So I'm going to come back to that question that we put a pin in and repackage it a little bit. Is there any way to prevent an intercommunity story from becoming a trope? And to answer this, we can start by looking back at Liz's chart to take a look at the kinds of practical differences between different types of disability representation and what each of them does. And so we started with a medical model in which a person overcomes their body and mind. And what's really key with these is who the audience for it is and what it does to the audience or does for the audience. And so with the medical model, we're usually seeing a story where disability is inherently a limitation of the body or mind. And the narratives that we see are usually people overcoming that limitation and achieving something that's, admirable to non-disabled people. And so when non-disabled people see that, it's a story of overcoming. It's inspiring. It makes them feel good. And I mean, that's exactly what Liz is saying with the Superhumans ad, that it is more medical in tone than social, because that's what we're seeing. We're seeing people achieving these feats, whether those are feats of mainstream athleticism or feats of brushing your teeth in the morning. And it's being portrayed as something that we should be kind of awestruck by, impressed by, maybe even a little bit shocked by. I mean, I think sort of the switching between the sort of peak athleticism and the mundane activities, there's often sort of a shock or surprise element to the way that disabled bodies are portrayed. It's like, oh wow, this is how you brush your teeth. This is how you pay for gas. Wow, that's wild. And that's the spectacle part that comes in. And I think having delved a little bit into that, we can also see why Liz maybe had concerns about me being super excited by the idea of a campaign where we're talking about doing mundane day-to-day things as if they're extreme sports. And so I'm going to skip over the social model for a minute, actually, and look right at the cultural model. And the key difference is that what I was talking about was not, it was not meant to inspire. It was not meant to shock people. It's an in-joke that already exists within the community. And so a campaign that sought to amplify this thing that already exists would be engaging directly with disability culture. But the question still remains, which is, what does that actually look like in practice? Is there any difference? And is there any way to start with this cool idea of this thing that already exists in a particular disabled community and prevent it from becoming something that's exploitative, that treats disabled people as spectacles and as oddities? And so if we come back to the example of the athletic brand that wants to reach a new group of customers for whom athletics are a lifestyle rather than a discrete set of activities, let's imagine someone watches this video and decides that they want to make my year and develop a campaign featuring chronically ill people with the tagline, "When getting out of bed is an extreme sport." What would that campaign look like if the target audience was chronically ill people? What would the campaign look like if the target audience was non-disabled people? We can answer the latter question pretty easily because, again, we can just go right back to the Paralympic Superhuman video that Liz showed at the beginning. And if we think about this in terms of a very pared down ad brief, the tone of voice is inspiring, surprising, upbeat. You could also go darker in tone, which is honestly what we see in a lot of disability ads. Usually it's still inspiring because you've got to have that positive narrative of overcoming the body. But there's usually sort of serious, it's maybe a little bit tragic, pitying, isolated, but then also has resolution. And in either case, whether you go with the upbeat or the sort of slightly more tragic approach, the key consumer benefit that you're communicating is that you're a good brand. You're doing good things. You care about these underrepresented people enough to create products for them and enough to show them in your ads. That's sort of the takeaway message. And if you take a look at critical access, and in particular, take a look at the Nike ad in question that Liz mentioned, that's exactly the narrative that plays out. There's actually also another a Toyota ad featuring a wheelchair athlete that has a really similar arc. It's actually remarkable how much this narrative arc gets replayed over and over again, kind of like a meme. So going back to what this would look like if it were targeted towards chronically ill people, we can really only speculate, but based on the conversations that happen within the chronic illness communities I participate in, the tone would be funny, it would be irreverent and maybe a little bit of dark humor. It would be playful and it would be powerful, because this is the thing too, we feel, it's not shocking to us that we use these devices in our day-to-day lives. It's simultaneously mundane, but it feels really good and kind of fun. Like, it's kind of silly that I am using gear that's meant for like really intense downhill skiers to literally just go outside in winter. It's kind of silly that I'm using weightlifting gloves to just go buy groceries. It's kind of silly that I'm using sports tape just so I can ride transit without being in pain. Like, there's a silliness to it that we're self-aware of, and that dominates a lot of these kinds of discussions within chronic illness and disabled communities. And there's also a self-awareness of how we're kind of inverting tropes that already exist about us. It's poking fun at the idea that we're, that chronically ill people are often framed as sort of lazy and malingering, but also that disabled people are necessarily superheroes and inspiring. So there's sort of always a sense of self-awareness as well to the ways in which we represent ourselves to each other. The key consumer benefit conveyed, of course, would be, hi, chronically ill people, we've got cool, comfortable, functional stuff that you can wear in your day-to-day lives, and we recognize the ways in which you're going to use them. And the interesting thing here is that if you take a look, if you consider the advertising objective, which is the athletic brand wants to reach a new group of consumers for whom athletics are a lifestyle rather than a discrete set of activities, this is the campaign that hits that objective. The campaign that follows the medical model and that features chronically ill people, but that targets non-disabled people, targets the non-disabled gaze, it doesn't meet that objective at all. And so I think this is the key takeaway that we're trying to give you here with this presentation, which is that if there is any way to prevent the inter-community story from becoming the extra-community trope, it is to represent to the community in question.
Yeah, so I think we're starting to run out of time, so I'm going to do just a quick summary. There is this term that we developed, and the term is knowledgeable fearlessness. And the basic premise behind knowledgeable fearlessness is to have a deep enough understanding of a specific community or culture to be able to engage in it in a way that is very fearless. But I actually, in going through this process, this progression with Alex on just this one specific topic, one of the things I've learned is that I think oftentimes what some of the fear is that knowledge that you're sort of objectifying one community for the benefit of your brand. And so, if this is a space in which you've been uncomfortable to engage in, really, if your goal is to really try and reach a disabled or a chronically ill consumer rather than get it right in terms of how do we portray them, if you're simply trying to reach us, I think that might be a really good way to ease your fear in a way in which you can engage more joyfully within the space. Do you have anything else to add, Alex?
Yeah, can we just bring up the previous chart for 1 sec?
Yes, 1 second. See how bad I am at this? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I think, I sort of want to emphasize that. I think this chart kind of nails it, and credit to Liz, where we take a look at the cultural model, and that is the only one that specifically targets disabled people. And how it makes the audience feel as witnessed and why is because it's for us. And there's such a fundamental difference between seeing yourself represented on screen as something to be consumed by other people who do not share your identities and seeing yourself represented on screen for yourself. And that's like, I mean, it's hard to say these things are radical, but it at least has radical potential. And so, I mean, I think that is the other takeaway I'd like to encourage from this.
Yeah, so that's all we got for you. Thank you so much. And again, Liz Jackson, Alex Haagaard, we're not hard to find.